What are we going to use the distance formula for? This is going to be easy to see here. It says which of the points P or Q is close to the point A. So I will just have to find what is the, sorry about this. I just have to find the distance between P and A and between Q and A and then compare. So to find the distance between P and A, and that equals the square root of, remember, the difference of the x coordinates square plus the difference of the y coordinates square. So the difference between the x coordinates 1 minus 5 square plus negative 2 minus 3 square. And then remember, if it's a positive or a negative number, it wouldn't matter because the quantity is being a square. So I have negative 4 squared, that's 16, and then I have negative 5 squared, which is 25, and that will be the square root of 41. Now the distance between Q and A, it is applying the same idea, the difference of the x coordinates square plus the difference of the y coordinates square. And for this will be 8 minus 5 plus 9 minus 3. 8 minus 5 is 3, square is 9. 9 minus 3 is 6, square is 36, so this will be a square root of the number 45. So although I don't have a calculator to figure out how much exactly is the square root of 41 or 45, well, I actually can't find it because this is an irrational number, and you know that the decimals never end and there is no pattern to them. At least I know that the square root of 45 is a bigger number than the square root of 41. So that means the distance between Q and A is greater than the distance between P and A. So it says which of the points is closer. So definitely point P is closer. The other thing that we're going to study with the coordinate plane is going to be midpoint. Now midpoint, as you may know, is the point in the middle. And since we're in the coordinate plane, we're going to be able to figure out what are the x and the y coordinates of this point if we know the x and the y coordinates of the endpoints of the segment. If I'm talking about the midpoint of something, it is not going to be of a line, it's going to be of a segment, because that's the only thing in geometry that has endpoints on both sides. So as long as it has a limited length, I can find what the middle is. If it doesn't have an end, then there's no way I can find the middle of something that doesn't have an end. So if I don't have any coordinates in here, the midpoint wouldn't be nothing but whatever this measurement is, and you can do it in inches, centimeters, it doesn't matter. But you will know that the midpoint would be the point that actually divides this segment into two equal parts. So let's say that this measures 12. The midpoint will be the point that divides this into two pieces of 6 and 6. In here, for example, what would be the length of something like this? If I don't have coordinates, I can always use my Pythagorean theorem. And this is 3, and this is 4, so I know for sure this is 5. And not because it works out the same way if I have a triangle with that measures 1 and 2, the hypotenuse is 3, that doesn't work that way. I just know that because it's a Pythagorean triplet, and you may have seen that before. I know that 4 squared plus 3 squared is 5 squared, but that's just a coincidence. It doesn't happen for every consecutive numbers. Anyhow, I know that if I measure this 5, the midpoint is going to be right here, and it will divide this segment into 2.5 and 2.5. So this point right here happens to be the midpoint of this leg that measures 3, and also happens to be at the midpoint of this leg that measures 4. You see how this point splits this segment into 2 and 2, and this will be into 1.5 and 1.5. So the midpoint of any segment will have this property. So let's see if it's true. I just happened to make the same triangle here. Let's see if it's true here. The midpoint would be right here in the center of this square, which happens to correspond to the midpoint of each leg right here. So we're going to use the same idea to figure out what is the midpoint for at any time I have 2 points on the plane. I know that it's going to be the midpoint of one of the legs and the midpoint of the other leg. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk to you about midpoint, if you think of your grades, for example, let's say that you have quiz 1 and quiz 2. Let's say that in quiz 1 you didn't study and you got 65. And let's say that for quiz 2 you really study, you watch your videos, you did your homework, you asked the questions, you came during lunch and during advisory, and you have everything down, and let's say that you got a 95. So what would be the midpoint? In this case, the midpoint is going to be a grade that is in the middle. How do I find that midpoint? There are different ways of doing this. Some people would say, okay, what's the difference between these two numbers, and then finding that difference, dividing by 2 and add it to 65. But what you're doing when you're finding the number in the middle, when you're finding what would be the grade here that is in between these two performances, is nothing but the average. So in average, between doing bad and doing really good, the average will be 65 plus 95 divided by 2, which is in this case 160 divided by 2, and that's 80. So doing bad one time and doing good the next time is the same thing as doing 80 both times. This is just the same, and this is something that is true for all your grades. Sometimes you get a lower grade and you don't show it to your parents, and then you wait until more quizzes come along so that you can do better, and then what your parents see at the end, it's only the average. So they assume that this 80 happened all along, and they never know about the 65 that you got at the beginning, or whatever bad grade you may have had. So it is the same idea. How do I find the grade in the middle? I'm going to take the average. That's the quickest way of doing it. You could have thought of doing 95 minus 65, and that is 30, and 30 divided by 2, that will be 15, and then you want to add 65 plus 15, and that will give you 80 as well. You could have done that the same, but this is pretty much almost one step. So now let's say that I want to find what is the midpoint between points A and B. So I connect A and B, and I know the midpoint is going to be right in the middle. But what I'm asked to find is, what are the coordinates of this midpoint? So the idea behind it is that I'm going to find, I know the midpoint is going to be the midpoint of this leg and the midpoint of this leg. This leg is parallel to the x-axis, so this midpoint on the x side is going to give me the x coordinate of my midpoint, and this midpoint of this leg that is parallel to the y-axis will give me my y coordinate of the midpoint. So let's talk about averages. What would be the average of these two x positions? This number is 3 because the x coordinate of point A is 3, and I know this number is 10 because that's the x coordinate of my point B. So what is the average of 3 and 10? The average is 13 divided by 2, 6.5. So I know my midpoint is going to have coordinates 6.5. And now, what would be the average of the y coordinates? I know this y coordinate is 2 because the y for my A is 2, and I know this y coordinate for my point B is 8. So the point in the middle is going to have coordinates 8 plus 2 over 2, and that will be 10 over 2, that will be 5. So I know this coordinate is 5, so my midpoint has coordinates 6.5, 5. And it also works with negatives. Let's say that B has a negative y coordinate. It really doesn't matter. It's always about the average. So the midpoint is here, and the x coordinate is going to be 2 plus 8 divided by 2, so that will be 5, and then 6 plus negative 2 divided by 2, and that's 4 divided by 2, and that's 2, and the y coordinate of my midpoint would be 2. So in general, and let's go to this picture right here, the midpoint has x and y coordinates, and the x coordinate will be the average of the x coordinates of the other 2 points, and the y coordinate would be the average of the y coordinates of those other 2 points. And this is the exact formula that you have right here. And this is something that is, I don't think it's new to you, but in case you didn't know it this way. So it's just average of the x's and average of the y's. That's pretty simple. It says example 3, applying the midpoint formula. Now this is an application. This is not that they give you 2 points and they ask you to find the midpoint. You have to do something with it. So it says, show that the quadrilateral with vertices P, Q, R, and S is a parallelogram by providing that its 2 diagonals bisect each other. So point P, Q, R, and S. I don't know where they are in the coordinate plane. I mean, I could graph these points, but if I'm trying to show that something is a parallelogram, it says you have to show, or you have to prove, that the diagonals bisect each other. What does that mean? So this is a diagonal QS, and the other diagonal would be PR. So when it says bisect each other, that means that where they meet, this point actually splits in half Q and S, and it splits in half P and R at the same time. So bisect each other. It's like double bisecting. Like this point is half of QS and this point is half of PR. So the only thing that I have to find is the midpoint between Q and S, and the midpoint between P and R, and if these 2 match, then they bisect each other. So the midpoint of Q and S, Q and S, what is the average of the x coordinates? 4 plus 2 divided by 2, and the average of the y coordinates, 4 plus 7 divided by 2, and that gives me 6, 3, and 5.5. Now the midpoint of P and R, 1 and 5 over 2, and then the average of the y's, 2 plus 9 over 2. 1 plus 5 is 6, over 2 is 3, 2 plus 9 is 11, over 2 is 5.5. So the midpoints are the same, so therefore they bisect. If they bisect, this is a parallelogram. So P, Q, R, S is a parallelogram. Yay!